Ever look up at a cloudy sky and wonder if we could, like, actually control it? It's a thought, right? Well, today's deep dive, we're getting into some wild stuff, weather modification.
Yeah.
We're talking about Under an Ionized Sky, this book by Lana Freeland, and then there's this other document, Weather is a Force Multiplier.
Yeah, we're going from the history of, like, making it rain to some really out there ideas about how people might be messing with the atmosphere.
Okay, so, like, first things first, you got to talk about those guys. What were their names? Schaefer and Vonnegut. Back in 1946, they were at General Electric, and they cracked the code on cloud seeding. How does that even work?
So picture a cloud, right? It's full of these super cooled water droplets. They're below freezing, but they need something to kind of grab onto a nucleus to actually freeze and fall as precipitation.
Yeah.
What Schaefer and Vonnegut figured out is that silver iodide, because its structure is similar to ice, it makes a perfect ice nucleus.
So they just, sprinkle this silver iodide into the cloud? And then it's like a chain reaction?
Exactly. The water droplets freeze onto the silver iodide, these ice crystals start to grow, and boom, rain, snow, whatever, it falls.
That's kind of mind-blowing. But, I mean, even with that breakthrough, actually controlling weather on a big scale, that can't be easy.
You're telling me early cloud seeding, it had its moments, some success, but nature's got a mind of its own. It's not like flipping a switch.
No kidding. Still, though, the idea of controlling the weather, that's got to be tempting, right? Especially for governments, the military. I mean, talk about power.
Right. And our sources, they point to this thing called Project Skyfire. The U.S. Forest Service, they're looking into using cloud seeding, but to control lightning strikes, prevent forest fires.
Whoa, fighting fire with that science. Ambitious, to say the least.
Yeah.
But then it gets even crazier, right? We've got this document, Weather is a Force Multiplier. It basically says that by 2025, weather modification, it could be a regular part of military strategy.
Straight up. The document lays it out, weather modification. It's not just going to be possible, it's going to be something people want. Controlling the weather, it'll be a game changer on the battlefield.
So we've gone from making it rain to potential military applications in, no time?
Yeah.
But then we get to Under an Ionized Sky, and things take a hard left turn into, I don't even know, conspiracy theories about what's really going on up there.
This is where things get fuzzy. We go from accepted science to speculation. Freeland, she's saying that those white lines you see in the sky, the contrails from planes, she thinks those could be something more intentional. She calls them chemtrails.
Chemtrails, yeah, I've heard that term thrown around, but I've never been totally clear on what it actually means.
Basically, the book is saying that those trails, they're not just condensation. Freeland thinks they're spraying metallic particles into the air, creating a layer, an ionized layer that they can use for all sorts of things. One of the claims, and this is where it gets kind of creepy, is that they could use this ionized layer to make radar way more powerful, like global surveillance.
Wait, so instead of just tracking planes, they're saying this radar could track anything, anyone on the ground.
That's the idea. They call it a space fence. The book points to tech like SuperDARN, that's a super dual auroral radar network, and THAAD, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System.
Okay, hold up. So we're talking about systems on the ground and in space, all working together to watch the whole planet.
That's what Under an Ionized Sky is saying, yeah.
And they're saying this space fence is connected to chemtrails. Now, this is starting to sound like a movie.
It does, doesn't it? And it gets even wilder. It doesn't stop with just tracking. Under an Ionized Sky suggests they could use this space fence for mind control.
Mind control. Okay, now we're going down the rabbit hole. How could they even do that with a space fence?
So they claim that technologies like HAARP, that's the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, combined with this conductive layer in the atmosphere from the chemtrails, could be used to mess with electromagnetic fields. And messing with those fields, they say, can affect how our brains work.
I gotta say, I'm a little skeptical. This is starting to sound less like science and more like, I don't know, something you'd read on a conspiracy theory website. Is there, any actual evidence for mind control?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
I mean, there is research out there on how electromagnetic fields can affect the human nervous system, like how some frequencies can mess with your mood or your sleep. But to say that the government's using this tech to control our minds, that's a huge jump.
A huge jump, yeah. But, okay, let's say, for the sake of argument, that there's some truth to this. Why? What's the end game? Why go through all this trouble?
Well, Under an Ionized Sky throws out a few ideas, all of which basically come down to control, right? Maintaining order, stopping people from disagreeing, maybe even rigging elections.
Okay, so pretty dystopian stuff.
Definitely. But it's important to remember that these are just claims, right? Lots of speculation, connecting dots that may not be there, not a lot of hard evidence.
Got it. So much to unpack here. We're talking about some pretty big and kind of scary ideas.
We are. And as we keep going, as we look more at under an ionized sky and compare it to weather as a force multiplier, it's really important to think critically. Just because two things seem connected doesn't mean one causes the other.
Right. Correlation, causation, all that. Good advice for life, but especially when we're talking about something as potentially world-changing as messing with the weather. Where do we even go from here?
hmm
That's a lot to digest, and I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah, we've covered a lot, but there's still so much more to explore. We need to dive deeper into the science, the technology, talk about what it all means. And all the while, we got to stay skeptical, keep our thinking caps on.
All right, folks, buckle up. This deep dive is about to get even more interesting. You know, it's one thing to talk about, like making rain or whatever, but under an ionized sky, it goes way further with this stuff about electromagnetic, what was it? Manipulation, and even mind control.
Yeah, that's where the line between real science and, just speculation, it gets really blurry.
Totally.
hmm
So how does this book even connect weather modification to something like mind control?
Okay, so Freeland, she's got this whole thing about metallic particles, right? The stuff she thinks they're spraying in the chemtrails. She says these particles interact with HARP, that radar project, and other advanced radar systems.
Okay.
And basically, her argument is that they're creating this, like, electromagnetic soup up there, and that this soup, it can mess with our brainwaves.
Hold on. Are you saying they think they can literally mess with our brains using, like, waves?
That's the gist, yeah. They point to research on electromagnetic fields, how certain frequencies, they can have these effects on your nervous system and whatnot.
Okay, but that's like mood changes, maybe messing with your sleep. That's a far cry from, like, full-on mind control,
Right.
making us do whatever they want.
Right, exactly. And to be clear, the book, it doesn't say they can, like, read your thoughts or control your every move. What they're suggesting is more like subtle manipulation, like maybe messing with emotions, disrupting sleep patterns, maybe even making people more susceptible to suggestion.
So kind of like subliminal messaging, but on a global scale?
You could say that, yeah. And it gets even weirder. Under an ionized sky, it also talks about this thing called no-touch torture. Basically, the idea that they can use these directed energy weapons to cause pain, but without actually touching you.
What?
Yeah, they even suggest that this technology, it could be used to, like, induce heart attacks or strokes.
Okay, now that's just terrifying if it's true. But again, where's the proof? Are there, like, actual scientists who back this stuff up?
That's the big issue, right? I mean, there's definitely legitimate research out there about how electromagnetic fields can affect us, but this book, it goes way beyond what most scientists are willing to accept.
So we're back in conspiracy theory territory.
It's definitely a gray area. Like, look, these technologies, they're real, right? And there's always the potential for someone to misuse them. But under an ionized sky, it's making some huge leaps, connecting dots that a lot of people would say aren't even there.
I hear you. It's like they're taking a tiny bit of truth, like, okay, maybe electromagnetic fields can do something, and they're spinning this whole, I don't know, sci-fi narrative out of it.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to think critically about this stuff. We have to be able to look at a claim and say, okay, what's the evidence? What's speculation? Separate the real from the made up.
Right, right. Okay, but let's play devil's advocate for a sec.
Yeah.
Let's say there is some truth to this, right?
Right.
Why? Why would anyone want to control the weather and mess with people's minds? What's the motivation?
Well, under an ionized sky suggests a few possibilities. One is, simple control, keeping things in order, making sure nobody rocks the boat, maybe even influencing how elections turn out.
Okay, so like a full-blown Orwellian dystopia.
Pretty much, yeah. The book also suggests that they could use this tech for economic gain, like maybe influencing the weather to help certain industries or messing with the market.
So it all comes down to power and money.
It's a common thread in a lot of these conspiracy theories, right? And, it's not totally outside the realm of possibility. History is full of powerful people doing messed up things to get ahead.
That's true. But isn't there a danger here? Like, by getting caught up in these really extreme theories, are we missing the more immediate concerns about weather modification? The real stuff, like environmental damage, or even just the ethics of messing with nature?
Absolutely. We have to be careful about that. I mean, even if we forget about the mind control stuff for a second, large-scale weather modification, that could have huge and totally unpredictable consequences.
Right. And we know it's already happening, at least to some extent.
Mm.
Cloud seeding and all that.
Exactly. People are using it to get more rain, to try and stop hailstorms, even to clear fog at airports. And as we learn more about the atmosphere, as our technology gets better, we're going to see bigger and bolder projects. That's a guarantee.
So what does that mean for us? Are we headed toward a future where, like, weather is just another weapon for governments and corporations?
It's definitely a possibility, and it's one we need to take seriously. That's why it's so crucial to have these conversations, right? Open, honest discussions about what weather modification means, about the ethics of it all.
We need to set some ground rules here. Regulations, oversight, all that, to make sure this technology is used responsibly, for everyone, not just a select few.
100%. It's a tightrope walk, really, trying to balance the potential benefits with the risks. We're talking about a powerful and unpredictable force, after all.
No kidding.
And that's why transparency is key. Scientists, policymakers, the public, we all need to be in the loop when it comes to this technology.
These conversations need to happen now, like before this tech gets even more powerful, more widespread.
Absolutely. Weather modification, it's not a simple issue. It has the potential to affect all of us. We need to be smart about it, consider all sides, and work together to make sure it's used ethically and responsibly.
Well said. Okay, so we spent a lot of time on under an ionized sky. We talked about chemtrails, mind control, the whole 9 yards. But we also have weather as a force multiplier to think about. That document, it presents a very different take on weather modification, right?
It does. While Under an Ionized Sky is all about shadowy figures and control, weather as a force multiplier, it looks at how weather modification could be a force for good, especially when it comes to the military.
Which seems kind of weird at first, right?
Sure.
How can you mess with the weather, especially during a war, and call it a good thing?
Well, their argument is that you could use weather modification to, lessen the damage from natural disasters. Imagine being able to steer a hurricane away from a populated area or prevent a flood, potentially saving lives and property.
Okay, that makes sense.
They also suggest that you could use it to create better conditions for military operations, like, say, clearing fog to get a better view of the battlefield or reducing wind speeds to make it easier for planes to fly.
So they're trying to make war less destructive.
That's the argument, yeah. They emphasize how important it is to use this technology ethically, responsibly, minimize harm, maximize the good you can do.
But even with the best intentions, aren't there always going to be unintended consequences? When we start messing with complex systems, especially something like the weather, don't we run the risk of really screwing things up? We've already talked about environmental damage and all that.
You're absolutely right. And the document, it acknowledges those risks. It stresses how important careful planning is, doing rigorous scientific testing, and then constantly monitoring what's happening to make sure things don't go off the rails.
So it's like walking a tightrope.
Pretty much.
Right.
You're weighing the potential benefits against the potential risks, and you're dealing with something incredibly powerful and unpredictable. And that's exactly why transparency and open dialogue are so important.
For sure.
We need scientists, we need policymakers, we need the public, all of us, to be part of this conversation about how we develop and use this technology.
It can't just be decided by a few people in a room somewhere.
Exactly.
This affects everyone. Okay, so we've covered a lot here, from the science of cloud seeding to the potential for good and bad, and then all the way to the far end of the spectrum with mind control and global surveillance.
And throughout this whole thing, we've been saying over and over how important it is to think critically. Don't just take our word for it or the word of a book, no matter how convincing it might seem. Question everything, look for evidence, and be willing to have those tough conversations.
Love it. So where does that leave us? What do we do with all of this information?
One thing's for sure, weather modification, it's here to stay. People are already doing it. And as we learn more, as our tech gets better, we're going to see even more ambitious projects.
And with those projects will come a whole new set of challenges. Ethical challenges, social challenges.
Absolutely. We need to be asking the tough questions now. Who controls this technology? Who benefits? Who bears the risks if something goes wrong? What about the environmental impact? What about national security? We have to consider all of the angles.
It's overwhelming, honestly.
It is, but we can't just ignore it and hope for the best.
No, definitely not.
The future of weather modification, it's not set in stone. It's something we can shape, but we have to be informed, we have to be engaged, and we have to be willing to speak up.
Those are powerful words. This
Mhm.
has been a lot. A deep dive in every sense of the word. Fascinating and a little bit scary, honestly, but important.
It is important. This isn't science fiction anymore. Weather modification is real, and it has the potential to impact all of us.
It's wild, right? We started talking about cloud seeding, and now we're here talking about mind control and, like, global surveillance from the sky.
It is moving fast, isn't it?
Yes.
Technology. And it
Yeah.
makes you think, how much do we really know about what we're messing with?
Under an ionized sky, even if we don't buy everything it says, it's still kind of unsettling.
Oh, yeah. It makes you think twice, right? Makes you realize we got to be careful with this stuff. We can't just invent new technologies and not think about the consequences. What's the point of all this if not to make things better?
Exactly. So what do we do? If weather modification is really becoming this big, powerful thing, is there anything we can do? Or are we just along for the ride?
Oh, we're not powerless. Not at all. The future isn't written yet, you know. It's up to us to shape how this technology gets used.
Okay, but how? What can we actually do? We're not scientists or politicians.
First things first, knowledge is power, right? The more we understand about weather modification, the science behind it, the good and the bad, the better we can talk about it, make informed decisions.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And once you have that knowledge, share it. Talk to people about this. Make them think about it. The more people who understand what's going on, the better.
Right. Okay, so education. What else?
We've got to make our voices heard, right? Talk to our elected officials. Tell them we want transparency, find out what the government's doing with this technology, what they're planning, demand regulations, oversight, all that.
So it's not just about the science, it's about politics too.
100%. It's about deciding what kind of world we want to live in and then actually doing something to make it happen.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Sure, but you got to start somewhere.
Right. Okay, so we've covered a lot in this deep dive. It's been a trip. Cutting-edge science, mind control conspiracies, ethical dilemmas. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is. It is. But the main takeaway here, and this goes for everything, not just weather modification, question everything. Don't just take someone's word for it. Look for evidence. Be willing to have those tough conversations, even if they make you uncomfortable.
Awesome. Couldn't agree more. This deep dive, it's been eye-opening, to say the least. We've gone from 0 to 60 on this topic.
And it's just the beginning, really. Weather modification, it's not going away. It's only going to get bigger, more complex.
So we got to stay informed, just be engaged.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And be brave enough to have those conversations, to speak up about what we believe in. We all have a role to play in shaping the future.
Couldn't agree more. Well, folks, that's a wrap on this deep dive. Until next time, keep looking up, stay curious, and never stop asking questions.